Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Last time when we got together, we began Chapter 12 of this book called The Global Vatican by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. Chapter 12 is entitled New Friends. And we just read the first paragraph or two of that chapter, so we'll retreat to the beginning of the chapter for continuity purposes this morning and continue our reading and discussion. But before we get to the book, I want to remind the listeners something you may well already know since there's so much press coverage about it. The current Antichrist, that's right, the current Antichrist, Pope Francis I, the Jesuit Pope, the first Jesuit Pope, has contaminated the soil of this once Protestant nation by descending upon the capital city of Washington, D.C. And Inquisition Update, as you might well imagine, is intensely concerned about what will be the ultimate outcome of this meeting of the Pope with the government of the United States in a joint session of Congress. And I will be watching events closely, listening to every word, and trying to give some perspective to the listeners of what bodes for the future of the United States as a result of this Pope's visit. We've been studying in this book the influence that the papacy carries over the United States in its foreign and domestic policy. And certainly the visit of this Pope to the country and the invitation of the United States government to come and speak is going to have grave consequences, especially to Bible believers in this country. One of the things that I'm going to be most keen on is the Pope's current fascination with global warming or climate change, or by whatever name they tag upon it, and his apparent leadership in leading the world to save the planet, to save the environment. All of the Pope's statements, both his past statements and his present statements, are built upon this foundation, this Antichrist foundation, that the creator of all heaven and earth, and particularly the creator of man and woman, the God of heaven who told man to be fruitful and to multiply and to fill the earth and to subdue it, was so inept as to not provide man an earth capable of sustaining a whole world full of people. That's the very foundation and basis of global warming, climate change, or by whatever name they tag upon it. This worship of the earth, okay? The Bible warns us that man is not to worship the creation, but the Creator. But the entire foundation of global warming and climate change, no matter how popular it is, and it is extremely popular in our generation, that entire thesis is built upon the premise that the God of heaven was an idiot and needs help from man in order to save the planet. First of all, the Bible is the basis for your understanding, your belief and understanding. The book of wisdom, the Bible. If wisdom is your aim, then you understand what the Bible teaches. In order to pollute man, in order to pollute the earth, first must come false doctrine, a false interpretation of Bible prophecy, false teaching, Antichrist teaching. The real pollution of the earth is spiritual. And all of that pollution, virtually all of that pollution, comes from the Roman Catholic Church, comes from the papacy. It comes from Roman Catholic canon law, and it comes from the false interpretation of Daniel's prophecy in chapter 9. That it was not Jesus who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease, the very act that marked him as the Messiah, but that causing the sacrifices and oblations to cease is attributed to a future Antichrist. This entire belief is built upon the foundation that Jesus was not the Messiah. Because Daniel plainly and clearly says in his prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 that he, Jesus, will cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. And for the overspreading of abomination, he will make it desolate, even unto the consummation. All right? Jesus caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease when he himself became the sacrifice, thus rendering all other sacrifices not only unnecessary, but blasphemous. Once Jesus gave up his life, that ended the sacrificial system of the priesthood. Jesus became the Lamb of God. That's what the Bible calls him, the Lamb of God, slain from the foundation of the world. Anyone who makes any sacrifice for the remission of sins or to gain grace, which is taught in the Roman Catholic Church, is blasphemy. It simply is an indication that Jesus was not the Messiah and that animal sacrifices or any other sacrifice, such as the Mass, is still necessary to impart grace to man for his redemption. It's an abject denial that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, furthermore, if one says that Jesus did not cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease, but that a future Antichrist will do this, you've denied that Jesus is the Messiah, because the act of causing the sacrifices and oblations to cease by giving up his own life and becoming the penultimate sacrifice, the sacrifice to which all animal sacrifices pointed, then you have denied that Jesus was the Messiah. You have denied that Messiah has come in the flesh. This is the spirit of Antichrist. And this is the whole purpose of the Vatican. This is the whole purpose of the papacy, to replace Christ on the earth. And that's the very reason they have perverted Christian understanding of Daniel's prophecy. It's called futurism today. Futurism. The idea that a man, a single man, will make a 7-year peace treaty with the Jews, and in the midst of the week, after 3.5 years, will cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. They pit that on a man who they call the Antichrist. And once he is done away with, then the Pope is free, having been forever rid of the onus, the Protestant onus of Antichrist. Then he can become the vicar of Christ on the earth, a representative of Christ. And that is what his title has always implied. that he has replaced Christ on the earth. Now, many might suggest that Inquisition Update is just a one-hit wonder, and that futurism is all that Tom Friess can talk about. But it is critical that we understand the purpose of futurism as taught in all the churches today. It is to destroy the efficacy of the Bible. It is to render, just as does global warming and climate change, or by whatever name they choose to tag on it, is to render the Bible useless, to render Christ useless in order to replace him with a human institution, the Vatican. Now, the current Pope, the current Antichrist, there have been many, 266 now, something like that, is in Washington, D.C. to press his global warming agenda. The Savior of the world, the Pope, is going to save the world from mankind dying in his own filth. But the papacy doesn't even understand what the filth really is. It is false wisdom. It has polluted the minds and the spirits of nearly all the world. God put us on an earth fully capable of sustaining a world full of people. God is not an idiot, nor a fool, nor does he tell lies. And when he said, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, he meant what he said. And I am fully confident that without the corruption coming from the Vatican, the earth could sustain a world full of people and give it plenty in reserve. We have enough air, we have enough water, we have enough food, we have enough energy to sustain mankind until Christ comes and renovates the world. But the papacy doesn't preach Christ, nor the Bible, nor truth, nor wisdom, but a false gospel centered around futurism. And the whole idea is that he must replace Christ. Inquisition Update will be listening very carefully to every word this Pope says. If I can understand it, I'll explain to you what his true agenda is in this country and the world. And if I can't explain it, I'll find an expert that can. But you're going to know, as best as we can determine, what the true intent of this papacy is for the United States, and particularly for Bible-believing Protestants. If you call yourself a Bible-believing Protestant, then you must abandon your belief in global warming and climate change. They are a Vatican agenda, and they render God, the Creator, a fool and his Bible useless. Do not participate in that charade. Now, chapter 12 of the Global Vatican, entitled New Friends, begins with a quote from another Antichrist supporter, Mikhail Gorbachev. He says, everything that happened in Eastern Europe would have been impossible without the Pope. Okay? We're talking about the subject that we've been talking about for the last few weeks here on Inquisition Update, the Soviet Union and its collapse. And the author, Francis Rooney, continues. He says, during spare moments in Rome, I often thought about the great wealth of history that had passed through the Vatican. Not just the distant history, but also the more recent past. The previous 20 years alone had furnished an abundance of dramatic episodes, starting with those great days in the late 1980s when communism gradually crumbled throughout Eastern Europe. The end came pretty much as the KGB's gloomiest prognosticators had predicted. Following the Pope's visit to Poland in 1979, the spirit of freedom spread into other Catholic countries of the Soviet Empire. Then, in a kind of reverse domino effect into the Catholic provinces of Russia itself. The Soviets did everything in their power to stop it, but they could not. Many forces combined to end communism in Eastern Europe, the most obvious being the failure of communism itself as an ideology and a system of government. The efforts of the United States and its allies, especially Margaret Thatcher's Britain, did much to accelerate the process, but the role of the Catholic Church must not be overlooked. What the Holy See lacked in guns, money, and economic leverage, it supplied in moral authority, the uniquely effective exercise of soft power. Much of this power emanated from the fact that the Church, unlike the communist governments, could be trusted. In his biography of Pope John Paul II, George Weigel quotes a Polish priest, quote, "People came to church to find out what the hell was going on in the rest of Poland," unquote. The Church provided not just sanctuary from the morally bankrupt totalitarian regimes of Eastern Europe, but a flag under which the faithful could gather. The events in Eastern Europe in the 1980s are a valuable model for the application of this recurrent idea of soft power. Soft power is most effective when it reaffirms what people already believe, then provides those people with a community and a platform to cultivate and exercise their beliefs. Consider the Arab Spring of 2011, when certain social network sites such as Facebook and others, and certain physical locations such as Tahrir Square, became places where anti-government protesters convened and organized. No international institution nor any social network brings people together more effectively than the Catholic Church. Okay, we're talking about overthrow of governments. No one has a greater ability to organize the people against governments than the Catholic Church. Let me read it again and see if you do the math the same way I do. He says, no international institution nor any social network like Facebook brings people together more effectively than the Catholic Church. Okay? So who's in control of society? Who has the greatest influence on the global social network? The Roman Catholic Church. And in the case of the Soviet Union, that influence by the Catholic Church providing the platform and the energy, the Church overthrew the Soviet Union. This is why Mikhail Gorbachev began by saying nothing that happened in Eastern Europe could have happened without the Roman Catholic Church. So what does that make the Roman Catholic Church? The world's superpower. No credit is given to the United States. Certainly the papacy could not have done what it did without the help of the once Protestant America. But the papacy claims, and the Roman Catholic Church claims, the victory over communism as the leader of the world's believers. The great social network, the harbinger of soft power, the Roman Catholic Church. And now he says no guns, no money, no militia, none of that. But the papacy has soft power. Never forget that the militaries of the world serve the papacy. When this author says the papacy has no money, remember the Vatican controls the Federal Reserve banks of the world. The Vatican controls global currency. The Vatican controls global trade. That's what the Bible tells us in Revelation chapter 18. The Bible tells us that the papacy controls the the kings of the earth. And if you can control the kings of the earth, you control the militaries of the earth. And this idea that the Pope doesn't have the money nor the guns to revolutionize the world, to overthrow governments, simply does not understand their Bible, nor do they understand the history, nor do they understand current events. Or they're just purposely being deceptive. Okay. No international institution nor any social network brings people together. Now we're speaking in the context of the overthrow of governments. Brings people together more effectively than the Roman Catholic Church. Now we've seen what the cooperation of Ronald Reagan and the Vatican achieved in Poland, which eventually, they say, overthrew the communist regime in the Soviet Union. What social effect might the Roman Catholic Church have in once Protestant America? Well, I think we're going to see even more vividly than we do now that influence of soft power right here in the United States of America. This papal idea that God is a fool, put us on an earth incapable of understanding us, sustaining us, not enough timber, not enough air, not enough water, not enough fuel. He's going to bring so much discredit to the God of the Bible that nobody will read it anymore. And if you don't read the Bible anymore, then you don't know who Jesus Christ is, and therefore you do not know who the Antichrist is. And then the Antichrist is free to elevate himself to global supremacy, which has been the very goal of the papacy from the beginning. Now, if the Pope can promote his global warming and Christians don't wake up to the lies, he's free to go, to do as he pleases. And as a consequence of global warming, that means that you are a consumer of energy and a polluter of the world. Pollution now is not related to spiritual and moral pollution, but physical pollution, human waste. And you're going to be taxed. Ultimately, every breath of carbon dioxide, which they say is a greenhouse gas, every breath of carbon dioxide that you emit will be taxed. Every gallon of gasoline that you burn. Do you understand that every stroke of every piston in your internal combustion engines will be taxed? You think you're taxed heavily now? You wait till the papacy completely fulfills his Antichrist role in the world and deceive the whole world. You are going to be taxed into oblivion. And if you can't afford to pay those taxes, then you're going to have to give up your automobile. You're going to have to give up your lawnmower. You're going to have to give up your cattle because they emit methane. You know, if I were to use some Iowa farmer lingo here, you might be offended. So I won't do that. But cattle eat grain. There's a chemical process that takes place in the many stomachs of a bovine, and the result is gas. That will be taxed. Do you see where this is going? You think you're enslaved now. You wait till the Pope finalizes his selling of this global warming crap all over the world, to use an Iowa farming term, and you won't have a penny yet to live on. The power to tax is the power to tyrannize. And if you give this Pope more reason to tax God's people, then you ought to pay the tax and live like a pauper. We've got to fight Antichrist. Antichrist teaches that God was a fool. Told us to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Yet put us on an earth incapable of sustaining us. Let's protest the lies. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Inquisition Update. We'll continue where we left off in the book before the break. By the way, if you wish to support Inquisition Update, please do so by supporting First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And as many listeners do, they email me, and if you wish to email me with a comment or question or a criticism, you may do so by email tom@seawaves.us, tom@seawaves.us. Now back to the discussion of how the papacy overthrew communism. Let me tell you a secret, okay? For those of you who can do the math, you realize communism hasn't been destroyed. The papacy is developing a global communism. The whole idea of the New World Order of the Pope is to make the world a global commune. There'd be no private property. All those of quote-unquote goodwill will share all the earth's resources in common. The Pope has set himself up to be the global Robin Hood, and he is now the provider. Since the world has denied that God is an adequate provider of all the things necessary to sustain life on this earth, the Pope becomes the provider. And as the Pope provides, that's how you will receive it. And if you happen to be blessed, as many think we are here in the United States, erroneously, your wealth is going to be redistributed. Your wealth has already been redistributed. Your jobs have all fled to foreign countries, China, India, Pakistan, all over the world, Mexico, all over the world. Your good-paying jobs are now gone. The Pope has redistributed your wealth. And he's redistributing the world's resources, too. As the global Savior, the global Messiah, the vicar or replacement of Christ on earth, is redistributing the world's wealth and converting the world by destroying all national and international borders, has made the world a global commune. The papacy did not overthrow communism. The papacy perfected communism and converted it from atheistic Russia to quote-unquote Christian papacy. Now are you beginning to understand what role the papacy is playing? What might be the content of his speech? Hidden under a veil of concern for the earth and the environment, the Pope is converting the United States government to be a vassal of the papacy. The concern of our government now is going to be to implement the policies and procedures of the Vatican. This book constitutes not just an admission, but a boast that the Pope controls the foreign and domestic policies of not just the United States, but the whole world. It's shaping up, it should be shaping up well in your mind what the overall agenda of the papacy is. And now we're talking about the supposed or the pretended overthrow of communism in Russia, when in fact the papacy is just bringing to itself all the attributes of communism. And that making himself the head of a global communism, a Christian communism. You talk about blasphemy. A Christian communism? A papal communism? It is global government by the Antichrist of history, and Antichrist of prophecy, and the Antichrist of the Bible, the papacy, the man of sin, the son of perdition. It's all taking place right before your very eyes. You just need somebody to click the switch so you can see it for what it really is. He says, no international institution nor any social network brings people together more effectively than the Catholic Church. What we need is global unity. ecumenical unity among all religions, all peoples, all nations, all tongues. The tribes of the earth must unite in a common cause, a communistic cause, a papal cause, an antichrist cause. And no one is more effective at swaying people than is the Roman Catholic Church. And the best example I've already talked about, futurism. That's how the papacy single-handedly destroyed the most effective weapon against the Antichrist, Protestantism. He did it through futurism. Okay? He says, as the veteran Vatican diplomat and current nuncio to Poland, Archbishop Celestino Magliori once expressed to me, the power of the church is its potential force of cohesion. That is, making people stick together. That's the Roman Catholic Church. He says, quote, we have a theological concept of communism or community. Did you hear what he just said? Listen again. It just substantiates everything that I've been telling you. Quote, we, that is the Roman Catholic Church, the one who coheses people, makes them all stick together, we have a theological concept of communion and community, unquote. There's your global communism. He says, we have a theological concept of communion or community, said Archbishop Magliori, but in political terms, this cohesive community can threaten governments. That's right. This global communist regime of the Pope is going to overthrow governments. And which governments do you think would be targeted by this global communist regime of the Popes? Protestant governments. One who attests that their rights come from God, not the Pope. The right of freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. Those come from God, don't they? So they're going to be overthrown. No freedom of speech, no freedom of conscience, no freedom of the press. And that's what you're seeing today. The change is in the process right now. We just have to be able to recognize it. They're going to overthrow the Constitution, the Protestant tenets especially of our Constitution. You won't be able to oppose this global communist government of the Pope, either in word, action, or deed, or sentiment. And they have the power to threaten governments. So if the governments wish to stay in place, what do they have to do? They have to cooperate with the Pope, don't they? Just as in the old world order. He said politicians fear that cohesion. That's right. The politicians in Washington, D.C. fear the cohesion of the people, which platform is the Roman Catholic Church. So when the Pope walks into Congress in Washington, D.C., if you listen carefully, you'll be able to hear the knees knocking and the teeth chattering because their jobs depend on obeying the Pope, because he organizes the people against governments for their overthrow. And that has been the entire history of the papacy. The overthrow of governments that do not serve the papacy. The Pope just issued an interdict closing all the churches. You couldn't get your baby baptized, and everybody knows that if you're a Roman Catholic and your baby dies before it gets baptized, why, it goes to purgatory. It goes to limbo. It goes to Timbuktu, but it don't go to heaven. So if you're a Roman Catholic and the Pope has closed your church, you've got to overthrow the government or bring it into compliance with the Pope. That was called an interdict. And the Pope has a modern equivalent of it. It's called regime change. And it's being applied all over the world, particularly by the United States of America. You want to bring the people together? Just threaten them with excommunication, or threaten them with the closure of the churches. They can't get married. They can't get their babies baptized. They can't participate in the sacrament of the Mass, where grace is infused. In other words, you doom them to eternal damnation if you close the church. And that unites the people. The people fear the Pope, and the governments of the world fear the Pope. And if the governments of the world don't fear the Pope, the people will put the fear of the Pope in the government. That's the history of the Roman Catholic Church. That's why we study this history here on First Amendment Radio. When the Pope walks into the joint session of Congress, the only people's knees who won't be knocking are those who are in full alliance with the papacy. Everybody else will be listening to every word in fear, the same fear that they ought to have for the Creator. He says a precondition of the cohesion, that is the unity of the people, is a critical mass of Catholics, of course, but where such exists, as it did in Poland in the 1980s, the church can be a formidable agent of social change. Okay? Now we're talking about global social change. And the Vatican is influencing global social change through global warming. The great threat, global warming. Human self-annihilation. Dying in our own filth. That's what the papacy is promoting. Again, built on the presumption, the diabolical Antichrist presumption, that God is a fool and put us on an earth incapable of sustaining us. You see how this works? Domino after domino after domino falls until you finally realize the last domino to fall is God himself. That's the whole purpose of the Vatican. The vicar of Christ, the replacement of Christ. You see now what the agenda is? To replace Christ. Now he says one reason for this is that the church is a universal sovereign. As a sovereign entity, the Catholic Church can speak for people within a nation, yet not be subject to the politics of that nation. Okay? This goes back to what I've explained many times on the program. If you wish to seek asylum in the United States of America, you simply go to a Roman Catholic Church. Every Roman Catholic Church, every Roman Catholic institution is a virtual asylum. You come under the authority of the papacy then, an authority upon which the civil government of the United States has no jurisdiction whatsoever. You hear all this talk in the news about sanctuary cities. That's what it's all about. What do Roman Catholics do when they flood across the Mexican border, which 98% of them are Roman Catholics? What do they do? What do they do when they cross the border? Of course, they have to escape the civil government or anybody else that wishes to put them back across the border into Mexico. What do? They seek refuge in a Roman Catholic Church because the Roman Catholic Church is a sovereign, a universal sovereign. Every government in the world recognizes the sovereignty of the papacy and the sovereignty of each and every one of his churches. You want to stop the flood of illegal immigrants, as you so stupidly call them? Close the Roman Catholic churches. Put the Roman Catholic churches under the civil authority. Strip the Pope of his authority over the churches. Nationalize the churches. That's what they did in Mexico years ago to stop the papacy from controlling everything. They simply nationalized the churches. The criminals could no more find refuge and asylum in the Roman Catholic churches. The priests didn't dictate what justice would be rendered in every case from that point on. The same needs to be done here in the United States of America. If the Roman Catholic Mexicans of Central and South America who flood across this border on a daily basis by the millions can find no refuge, no sovereignty, no sanctuary in the Roman Catholic churches, then they're subject to the civil power. If there's still any people control of the civil power, my assertion is that the Vatican is more and more control of the civil power. And the civil power wouldn't arrest those people anyway, but would take the role of the Roman Catholic Church in providing driver's licenses and Social Security cards for those Mexicans. There's going to be no stop of the flooding in of Roman Catholic invaders to this country so long as the papacy has control of our government. And so long as the papacy's churches become the asylums of these criminals. And you got to ask yourself, why doesn't the press recognize this? Well, because they're not supposed to. It's a secret. And you're not supposed to know. Okay? The whole idea that the papacy is a universal sovereign, and whatever the papacy controls becomes an embassy for the papacy, an asylum. This is exactly how they shuffled John Wilkes Booth after the assassination, or rather John Surratt after the assassination of President Lincoln, out of the country. They put him up in monasteries. If the government of the United States wished to pursue John Surratt, their pursuit would end at the threshold of the door of the Roman Catholic monasteries in which he was sanctuaried. Or they would run afoul of the global sovereign, the Pope of Rome. And John Surratt made his way, through the help of Roman Catholic priests, all across from the United States to Canada, from Canada to England, from England to Rome, where he served in the Zouave Guards. Every Roman Catholic church, every Roman Catholic institution in this country is a universal sovereign, just like the Pope. He owns it, he controls it, he's the single, solitary governor, and no other government can cross that threshold without his permission. All right, one reason for this is that the church is a universal sovereign. As a sovereign entity, the Catholic Church can speak for people within a nation, yet not be subject to the politics of that nation. That is, the governments of that nation. So if you're a Protestant nation, you have no effect over a papal sovereign institution. You see why they titled the first chapter of this book, The Greatest of All Evils to be Feared in a Nation? Look, this is all new information to most of my listeners, but just, you've all been told about the great threat that Islam is. Just think that if the United States was covered from border to border, coast to coast with Islamic mosques, and they came under the sovereign authority of the guru of Islam, and through the Mexican and Canadian borders were flooding into this country radical fundamentalist Islamists, and they were all seeking sanctuary into these churches, what do you think the United States people cry would be? What, nationalize the churches, bulldoze them, stop them, ignore this pretended sovereignty of this Islamic guru. This is the United States of America. And we're not going to have his Islamic invaders coming and destroying this Christian nation. and becoming a threat to our national security. You don't hear that kind of sentiment about the Roman Catholic Church because it's regarded as quote-unquote Christianity. Nothing could be further from the truth. It cannot be called Christian if it seeks to replace Christ. Okay? He says, compared, for example, to the Orthodox churches of Eastern Europe, which have long-standing ties to the state, the Catholic Church is a supranational and subject to no authority other than its own. And this is what's taught in papal encyclicals throughout the ages. The Pope is the judge of every man, and no man may judge him. The papacy doesn't even answer to God. That is the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. That's how the Roman Catholic Church has forbidden the reading of the Bible and burnt Bibles historically and burnt people who read the Bibles and has flooded the earth with counterfeit Bibles, Bibles that teach teach lies, that pollute the earth with lies. You getting an idea of what the sovereignty of the Pope really means? Do you think that the sovereign of all sovereigns in this context has any right to set foot in this country? Does it have any right at all to preach his filthy doctrine in the central governing authority of this country, Congress? Well, you just as well let an Islamic imam come and dictate to our government how it should rule the people. You wouldn't tolerate that, would you? Then why would you tolerate the papacy? The Roman Catholic Church is a supranational. In other words, it transcends all national boundaries and is subject to no other national boundary but its own. It is subject to no authority other than its own. That's what makes it uniquely divine in the mind of a twisted Roman Catholic. That's why they call him the Vicar of Christ. He's subject to no earthly power. So if the Pope is subject to no earthly power, then what is his position going to be when he speaks before Congress tomorrow or the next day or the day after? It's from a position of ultimate authority. He's going to be speaking down to our Congress just like a parent speaks down to his child. You will do what I tell you to do, and you may not question what I tell you. And everybody in the congressional chamber is going to receive what the Pope says with that mindset. The Holy Father in their mind is going to speak. And he's not going to tolerate question or dissent. Oh, yes, there'll be a form of dissent, a form of questioning in the press, but that's all an exercise to bring everyone into compliance. The cohesion of the people. And no one makes the people stick together more than the Roman Catholic Church. And even your Protestant pastor from behind the pulpit is going to have to acknowledge the sovereign authority of the Pope. And they may pretend to protest, but ultimately they're going to cave. Vatican Council II has vanquished the Protestant churches. There's no Protestant pastor, or at least very few in this country, that's going to suggest a protest because of Vatican Council II and futurism. Okay, they're all about building a Christian society in the United States, and what that really means is a Catholic society. Their spiritual leaders come to speak to our government this week. And they're going to be all eyes and ears. And they're going to teach their people no matter what denomination, to obey it. Obey the civil power. Romans chapter 13, obey the civil power. Don't be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and point your finger in the king's face and say, we will not bow down to your image. You may cast us in the fiery furnace, but our God can save us. And even if he doesn't, we will not bow down to your image. They're not going to teach you to protest against this papacy government. They're not going to promote any Shadrach, Meshachs, and Abednegos in this country. Only the Holy Spirit of Almighty God can do that. All right, the state serves the church. That has always been the case. Oh, I see we've run out of time. We'll finish we'll pick up where we finished today tomorrow. Stay tuned for more on First Amendment.